The Martinez family had always measured worth by what could be seen, touched, and counted. My father owned a construction company that poured foundations and raised buildings across the city. My mother's catering business fed half the weddings and banquets in town. My older brother Carlos had followed in their footsteps with a chain of auto repair shops that made him a tidy fortune fixing engines. To them, these were real accomplishments: fix concrete, repair cars, cook meals, collect payment. Straightforward, profitable. And then there was me, 31, the black sheep, the one who had, as Dad liked to say, spent 8 years playing lawyer. In their eyes, I was Carmen, the eternal student who had sunk myself into staggering law school debt, only to scrape by at a tiny legal aid clinic, earning less than Carlos did in a single month of wrench turning. They saw my secondhand apartment, my dented Honda, my paycheck that barely covered bills, and concluded I had chosen a life of failure dressed up as principal. What they didn't know, what no one outside a very small circle knew, was that 6 months earlier I had been appointed to the Superior Court. At 31, I had become the youngest Latina judge in the history of the state. The secrecy had been necessary through the confirmation process, and afterward I had chosen silence, saving the revelation for the swearing-in ceremony. Why open myself to months of unsolicited lectures about judicial ethics and responsibility? Better to let them believe their story about my wasted potential than endure that ordeal. The irony never stopped astonishing me. While they wrung their hands over my finances, my judicial salary was set to surpass the combined incomes of their businesses. While they dismissed my career as meandering, legal scholars were already calling my appointment a landmark for diversity in the judiciary. But to my family, I remained Carmen, the dreamer who hadn't learned the value of a trade. When Morrison Blake and Associates announced their annual holiday gala at the downtown athletic club, my father could hardly contain his excitement. His company had handled renovations for a handful of law firms, and somehow that connection had landed him an invitation. He saw it as a chance to sniff out contracts, to shake hands with attorneys who might someday need office build-outs. And because his daughter happened to dabble in the legal field, he felt like an insider. Never mind that for years he dismissed the entire profession as empty theorizing. Carmen should come with us, he said over Sunday dinner, his tone generous, as though granting me a chance to prove myself. She can introduce us to the important lawyers. Maybe she'll finally see what a real career in law looks like, as opposed to helping families keep their homes or guiding immigrants through the system. I thought but not said. Mom chimed in eagerly. It'll be good for her. Maybe she'll get inspired to aim higher than that little clinic. And so I found myself that night in a dress that had survived too many years, walking into the club at their side. The ballroom shimmered with holiday garlands and crystal chandeliers. The air buzzed with lawyers in sharp suits trading case stories, partners talking mergers, associates calculating billable hours. My father moved through the crowd like a salesman at a trade show, introducing himself with booming confidence, always circling back to his favorite prop, me. This is my daughter, Carmen, he'd announce. She works at a legal clinic downtown, still chasing those lawyer dreams. The phrasing sliced each time. Still chasing dreams. As though my work meant nothing, as though I hadn't achieved anything, only persisted in some hopeless pursuit that others with more sense would have abandoned. 2 hours in, with champagne loosening his already loud tendencies, he cornered a group of attorneys near the bar. They looked trapped, polite smiles fixed in place, as he launched into the construction business, then pivoted to me. The legal field's brutal, he declared, gesturing toward me. So much competition, crazy hours, and unless you make partner at one of these big firms, there's no money in it. One attorney nodded, clearly calculating an escape. My daughter's been grinding at it for 8 years, Dad continued, his voice carrying across the room. Legal aid work, public interest cases. Noble, sure, but not exactly profitable. The heat climbed my neck. Around us, other conversations faltered. My father was turning me into a cautionary tale about impractical ambition. She keeps hoping something bigger will come along, he said, louder still, but realistically, paralegal's probably her ceiling. Maybe some admin role at a bigger firm if she's lucky. The word hit me like a slap. Ceiling. He had declared my limits for me. and now they hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one wanted to breathe. I caught the flicker of discomfort in the faces around us. One woman even winced. "Dad," I murmured, trying to cut him off. "Maybe we should." "Nothing wrong with being practical," he bulldozed on, voice rising another notch. "Some people are made for big legal careers. Others are better suited for support work. Carmen's smart, don't get me wrong, but she doesn't have that killer instinct real success in law takes." And with that, he left me standing in a circle of lawyers who now knew two truths: my father's certainty about my failure, and my silence as I let him believe it. The stares around me cut in different ways, some filled with pity, others heavy with discomfort at watching such a humiliating scene play out in public. I wanted nothing more than to sink into the floor and vanish. That was when I noticed him making his way toward us, Thomas Morrison, the senior founding partner of the firm, hosting the evening. Distinguished, silver hair, an air of authority that carried the weight of decades. One of the most respected attorneys in the entire state. He was coming directly toward our group, and my stomach dropped. The very last thing I needed was for him to overhear my father dissecting the supposed limits of my career. "Excuse me," Morrison said, his voice carrying with effortless authority as he cut into my father's monologue. I couldn't help but overhear. My father turned, the realization dawning that someone important was approaching. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Conversations hushed, people moved aside, and suddenly every eye in the area was locked on him. "Judge Martinez," Morrison greeted, a broad and genuine smile spreading across his face. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." The title hit the group like a thunderclap. My father's champagne glass shook in his hand. "Mr. Morrison," I said, extending a hand, keeping my composure steady. "The honor is ours," he replied warmly. "Your appointment to the Superior Court has caused quite a stir. Youngest Latina judge in state history, extraordinary." The silence was absolute. My father's face shifted through shades of red, pale, then a queasy green. Morrison, unaware of the family drama he detonated, continued with enthusiasm. "I've admired your work at Legal Aid for years. The Martinez precedent on tenant rights, remarkable legal reasoning, and your contributions to immigration law, outstanding. The State Bar is even considering you for the Human Rights Award." "Thank you," I replied, conscious of the crowd of ears straining to catch every word. "When's the swearing in?" he asked. "Next month. The governor's office is finalizing the schedule." "Excellent. The bench is lucky to have you. That kind of experience with legal aid is invaluable." All this time, my father hadn't said a word. He just stood rooted to the spot, glass in hand, face rigid as he processed the reality that his daughter, whom he just publicly declared to be ceilinged at paralegal work, was in fact a superior court judge. Morrison turned to the attorneys who'd been captive to Dad's earlier boasting. "Have you met Judge Martinez? Her housing law work has influenced policy across several states. Brilliant mind." Suddenly, the lawyers who had been wincing minutes ago leaned forward eagerly, wanting to hear about case law and judicial philosophy. Even the woman whose look had been pity now asked about my shift from advocacy work to the bench. Through it all, my father remained mute, his expression flickering through humiliation, disbelief, confusion, and, somewhere buried beneath it all, what might have been pride soured by shame. Morrison eventually drifted away to greet other guests, but the damage was already irreversible. Word spread across the party like fire. The woman her father had belittled was, in fact, the state's newest judge. For the rest of the night, attorneys stopped me, some with congratulations, others curious about my approach to the law. Each exchange widened the gulf between my father's assessment and reality. He lingered nearby, swirling the same glass of champagne, opening his mouth occasionally, only to shut it again without speaking. Finally, near the end of the evening by the coat check, he approached. "Carmen," he said softly, "we need to talk." "Do we?" I asked, slipping my purse onto my shoulder. "Judge Martinez," he tried again, the words awkward in his mouth. "When did this happen? How long have you known?" "The appointment came 6 months ago." The confirmation hearing stretched another 4. "And you didn't tell us. Would it have changed anything about tonight?" The question stopped him cold, because we both knew the answer, yes. He would have spoken differently, introduced me differently, wrapped himself in reflected pride. But it would have been about recognition, not respect. We didn't know, he said weakly. You didn't know because you never asked. You saw the words legal aid and assumed you knew everything. You never cared about the cases, the outcomes, or the impact. You never bothered to find out. By then, my mother had joined us, having pieced together enough of the evening to understand. Carmen, sweetheart, why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to know how you'd treat me without the title. And now I do. Dad's face was ashen. Carmen, I'm proud of you. I always supported your career. You called paralegal work my ceiling 20 minutes ago. The words hung heavy between us. There was no untangling them, no reframing them as tough love. I didn't realize the scope of your achievements, he admitted at last. That's the problem, I said quietly. You didn't realize because you didn't care enough to look. The swearing-in ceremony at the state capitol was a spectacle. The governor presided. The Chief Justice administered my oath. My family sat in the front row, watching the daughter they had underestimated rise as the youngest Latina judge in the state. The media coverage was sweeping, legal journals analyzing the importance of the appointment, civil rights groups celebrating the breakthrough. My father began keeping clippings in a folder, boasting to anyone who would listen about his daughter, the judge. Conveniently, his earlier dismissal vanished from his narrative. But public pride couldn't mend private fractures. Trust isn't rebuilt by headlines. It takes consistency, respect, and acknowledgement of failure. Our relationship shifted, but scars remained. I still live the way I always have, driving a modest car, staying grounded, committed to service. The salary gives me more stability, but my values haven't changed. Justice is not about titles or prestige. It's about fairness, dignity, and protecting rights. The people who valued me before my title, the clients, the colleagues, the community leaders, still matter most. Genuine respect comes from seeing worth without needing the validation of a title. Last week, my father called about Christmas plans. No talk of ceilings or limitations, just plans. Sometimes it takes humiliation to teach a lesson, but the lesson does sink in. And earlier this month, I presided over my 100th case. Each decision guided by the principles I carried from the very start: fairness, compassion, and an unwavering belief in justice. That, to me, is worth more than applause, approval, or any party full of whispers.